Hello everyone, and welcome to the 196th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring our patron pick for September 2024, Two-Face from the Batman and DC animated universes. Well, it's been over 6 months since I last covered a Batman villain, and the patrons weren't having that. So here we are, discussing our first iteration of Two-Face in an Analyzing Evil episode. A version of the character that often finds himself ranked as one of the best we've ever been given. And if you'd like a say on one of the characters I cover each month, consider becoming a channel member by following the link in the description, or by clicking the join button on my channel's homepage. The Batman animated series holds a special place in the hearts of millions of people. A formative experience that further solidified just how beloved and iconic Batman and the characters in his universe are in this superbly crafted series. And with talents like the late Kevin Conroy and Richard Mole, who voiced Batman and Two-Face respectively, you're treated to an experience that still holds up to this day as one of the best Batman universes we've ever been given. But there's more to this universe than just the shows and the films, as there have been numerous comic books created since the show's release that have helped to flesh out its many characters. And so in this video, we'll be pulling information from the following sources for details about Two-Face: Batman the Animated Series, New Batman Adventures, Justice League vs. the Fatal Five, as well as the following comics: The Batman Adventures, Batman Adventures The Lost Years, The Batman and Robin Adventures, Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman Black and White, Batman Gotham Adventures, Batman The Adventure Continues, and finally, the Batman Beyond comic. Now without further ado, let's begin. Everything that made Harvey Dent into a dualistic demon came as a result of a series of unfortunate events that began in his childhood. Harvey was born and raised in Gotham City, the son of an unnamed mother and a man named Lester Dent, and unfortunately for Harvey, his home life was anything but good. Lester was an alcoholic gambler who would come home and beat his wife and son either when he was just drunk and felt the need to do so, or when he lost money gambling. He'd also invent reasons to hit him, like when his bed wasn't made or when his homework wasn't done. To add an extra layer of cruelty to the punishments he subjected his son to, Lester would flip his lucky double-sided silver dollar that his son would later inherit to decide whether or not he was going to beat Harvey. Good heads meant Harvey would be spared, and bad heads meant he'd get the rod. Lester would tell his son later in life that he disciplined him in this way to teach Harvey about life, that when it comes down to it, everything relies on random chance, or as Lester calls it, dumb luck. Additionally, in the Batman the Animated Series guide, it states that Lester never considered Harvey more than half a man, which is telling of how cruel and callous Harvey's father was. While all of the abuse Harvey had to endure was horrific, the only silver lining here is that one day, Lester decided to up and leave his wife and son behind. But by the time he left, plenty of damage had already been done, as not only is being severely beaten by an alcoholic father something that has a great effect on a person's development, but his father's lessons about the nature of the world and the idea that everything is decided by chance would harm Harvey's worldview and serve as one of two contributing factors to his development of his second personality, Big Bad Harv. However, the second incident that caused Harvey to develop dissociative identity disorder was arguably more impactful. When Harvey was in grade school, he was being bullied, and one day in a surge of anger, he fought back against this bully, and after hitting him, he collapsed and was taken to the hospital the next day. In this moment, Harvey believed that his anger had caused him to seriously wound another person, and he was horrified, a case of an abused boy with a generally sweet disposition who couldn't believe that he'd hurt someone in a way that he had been hurt so often. From that day on, Harvey vowed he'd never hurt another person like that again, stuffing any angry feelings he had deep down into his soul ever after. However, Harvey didn't cause this boy to go to the hospital, and ironically, it was actually a case of random unfortunate chance, as the moment that Harvey struck this boy, he suffered a case of appendicitis, which is what really sent him to the hospital. It wouldn't be until many years had passed that Harvey would discover the truth though, and by then, the damage had already been done. Now in all likelihood, Harvey's exposure to abuse and the trauma of harming another person so severely is what contributed to his desire to pursue a career defending the weak and championing justice. But this repression of his anger and the trauma he suffered at the hands of his father, and from the belief that he seriously injured another person, made Harvey into a powder keg of emotions that was liable to burst one day, and burst it did. At some point in time, Harvey served in the Air Force, and by the time this series began, Harvey had already made his way to District Attorney of Gotham City, and with the help of his good friends Commissioner Gordon, Bruce Wayne, and Batman, the streets of Gotham were on their way to being safer than they'd ever been before. Being in such a position of power though, Harvey was always going to be a target for the seedier elements of Gotham. Harvey has always had to contend with the blackmailing and threats of thugs, but the first time he was ever in real danger is when he started dating a woman by the name of Pamela Isley, better known as Poison Ivy. Ivy had decided that Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent were murderers for their role in destroying a field of wildflowers, to make way for Stonegate Penitentiary, and to get revenge on Harvey, she began dating him and eventually poisoned him with a kiss. Another instance of Harvey being harassed by villains during his tenure as DA was when the Joker kidnapped him after Batman and Harvey agreed to set a trap for him in the Batman Adventures comic to foil a plot he had hatched to undermine the city's authority figures. While these are notable moments in Harvey's life, Ivy and Joker really had nothing to do with his descent into darkness. No, that honor goes to business tycoon and crime boss, Rupert Thorne. Just prior to his transformation, Harvey was both campaigning for re-election and heading a big case against Thorne, and after a raid on one of his hideouts, Harvey appeared on the scene to gain a bit of positive press to boost his campaign. When one of Thorne's thugs was being arrested, he kicked some muddy water into Harvey's face, which caused him to go ballistic and punch this man right in front of the press, earning him the name Hot-Headed Harvey afterward. This was a pivotal moment for Harvey, as on the whole, Harvey Dent is a kind, amiable, and good-natured man who only wants what's best for his city and his loved ones. But repressing anger is different than eliminating it, and while Harvey had managed to keep a lid on it until this moment, it was bound to boil over eventually. Because he had stuffed his anger down for so long rather than attempting to control it, Harvey had basically ensured that at some point, his anger would be always bubbling just beneath the surface and ready to explode at the slightest provocation. And that's exactly what happened here. And then not too long afterward, when Thorne's case ended up getting thrown out, he had another outburst at one of his fundraisers. However, Harvey's repressed anger wasn't just a bomb waiting to explode. It was an entity of its own, one that haunted him in his dreams and was spilling over into his days that he had manifested from his trauma and guilt. Big Bad Harv. For years, Harvey has been suffering from a case of dissociative identity disorder, or DID, which is an incredibly rare disorder that causes a person to form one or more different personalities that often war with each other inside their minds. Without the proper treatment, these alternate personalities can take over at any time, and each personality can have their own voice, mannerisms, gender, and personal history, and they can even have different physical qualities, like needing glasses to see, when the core personality doesn't. Harvey has apparently been seeing a therapist to help curb his symptoms for some time, but with infrequent sessions and a full timetable due to his position as DA, and, at the time that his anger begins to overwhelm him, an election to worry about, Harvey's alternate personality began to take more and more control over his day-to-day life. Unlike Harvey, Big Bad Harv is loud, boisterous, and uncouth. He considers Harvey to be a weakling, and himself to be the strength the two of them need to take whatever they want from the world. Fortunately for Harvey, there was an avenue he could have taken that would have allowed him to curb the symptoms of his disorder and make it more manageable: inpatient treatment at a medical facility. Unfortunately though, Harvey chose not to take this option because of his responsibilities and his campaign, opting instead to increase his therapy sessions with his doctor. This might have been an effective, albeit temporary fix, but life had other plans for Harvey Dent. Thorne's goons had been trailing Harvey for some time, as they'd been ordered by their boss to dig up dirt on him so he could use it to blackmail him and take the heat off of him. And one night, they saw Harvey leaving his therapist and subsequently broke into her office, stole his file, and delivered it to Thorne. After informing Harvey of the dirt he had on him, Harvey quickly made his way to Thorne's hideout at a chemical plant to try and negotiate with him. But things soured when Big Bad Harv decided to take the reins, and Batman appeared to try and save Harvey. In the ensuing chaos, an electrical wire fell into one of the chemical vats and splashed the left side of Harvey's face, scarring him gruesomely in more ways than one. After witnessing the horror people expressed at his disfigurement, chief among them his fiancée Grace, Harvey chose to abandon his old life and completely become the monster that he'd hidden beneath the surface of his soul that now lived eternally as a mark upon his face. Harvey was already an imposing figure before his transformation, as his height and hard angular facial features made him an intimidating sight. But now with half of his body accentuated by a piercing yellow eye, a bushy black eyebrow, blue scarred skin, ghastly white hair, a disfigured rictus grin, and a low and raspy voice, Harvey had become a walking monstrosity. But that isn't really a fair way to describe Harvey's appearance, is it? Yes, his appearance is quite gruesome, but the way that he looks is the result of a serious injury that I, nor any of you, should label as monstrous. As though it is unsettling, looking like Harvey does not make a person a monster, no matter what kind of knee-jerk reaction to such a visage might pop into our minds when seeing one. And to anyone out there who may be watching this video that has suffered a similar injury, you're a person like any other, and your appearance does not make you a monster. That being said, Harvey in many ways is a monster, and while his appearance does accentuate that fact, he's a monster because of his actions after his disfigurement, not because of his appearance. As the dualistically dressed Two-Face, the dominant force in Harvey's mind has now been swapped, with Big Bad Harv holding the reins of Harvey's mind 90% of the time, while the good that still lives within Harvey sits idly by and watches as he unleashes misery and suffering upon Gotham. Known now as Two-Face, another arch-criminal plaguing Gotham, Harvey's personality has shifted dramatically. While before Big Bad Harv was a thuggish nuisance, Two-Face is a cruel, callous, and merciless man who often berates and chastises everyone he encounters, even those who work for him. In this new persona, Harvey has become entirely focused on getting revenge on the people who hurt him, or lashing out at a world run on random chance that took everything from him. The lessons Harvey's father taught him when he was a boy have become his entire reason to be, with an ardent belief in the idea that chance rules everything, including himself, which is the only rule that Harvey follows. But it's more than just a rule for Harvey. With his psyche already split between two personalities, the physical split he experienced with his scarring instilled an obsession with chance within Harvey so severe that he is incapable of doing anything at all without consulting his coin first, the only thing Harvey inherited from his father, aside from the host of unpleasant memories he left him. Who lives, who dies, who gets robbed, who doesn't. All is decided by the coin, even when the other result would be detrimental to his ambitions. And Harvey is so reliant on this coin that he enters a panic frenzy whenever he loses it, risking everything including his own life to reobtain it. Chance is everything, whether you're born or not, whether you live or die, whether you're good or bad. It's all arbitrary. This is a speech Harvey gives to Grace that sums up his philosophy quite well, and just as his overall persona is ruled by the number 2, everything in Harvey's world echoes that sentiment. With any lodgings he sets up split 50-50 between the clean and the orderly, and the seedy and debaucherous. With his ideology deciding everything he does, Two-Face begins to run amok in Gotham. He begins a career in crime as a strong-armed thug, who few can match, tearing through the city with plots and schemes centered around the number 2. His first order of business upon assuming this new identity is to attempt to exact his revenge on Rupert Thorne, stealing from various businesses he owns over the course of 6 months, with his twin henchmen Min and Max supporting him, his ultimate goal being the use of his confidential file that he took from Thorne's attorney to bring him down. After he's betrayed by a well-meaning Grace, Harvey is sent away to Arkham, but like most of its denizens, Harvey manages to escape numerous times. Now, while the crimes Harvey committed in an effort to eliminate Thorne are the first string of crimes he committed after his disfigurement, the timeline for the Batman animated universe is sort of muddled, so it's kind of hard to tell when Harvey did what in this universe. Sometimes there are indicators that one event came before or after another, so I'll put things in order when I can. But otherwise, I'm just going to regale you with his crimes in the order that I watched or read each entry. Harvey at one point stole 2 million in twos from the Gotham Mint with the help of the Two-Ton Gang. And when Batman showed up and he flipped his coin, Batman lost the toss. And so Harvey took his utility belt and tied him to a giant penny and flipped it. But Batman managed to steal his coin and used it to cut his restraints, freeing himself and foiling Harvey's plot. Sometime later, Harvey tagged along with Penguin and the Joker to Dr. Hugo Strange's resort to bid on Batman's identity, but Bruce managed to get the better of them and keep his identity from being revealed. In one of his more masterful plots, Two-Face helped to install a man named Gil Mason as deputy police commissioner, with the goal of eventually eliminating Jim Gordon so Gil could take over and give Two-Face a second army in the form of the Gotham Police Force, which would have granted him complete criminal hegemony over Gotham City, a plan that ultimately failed when he was once again beaten by Batman. Two-Face would later participate in the mock trial of Batman in Arkham as the prosecutor of his case, which ended with every villain involved recaptured and placed back in their cells. Aside from his penchant for theming his crimes around the number 2, another thing that Two-Face is famous for is recruiting into his gang the people he prosecuted when he was DA. And in the Batman Adventures Volume 1 Issue 22, he breaks a lot of the people he incarcerated out of Gotham State. With these new forces, he stages another breakout at Blackgate so he can lure Batman there and trap him with all the released inmates. But once again, Batman recaptures Harvey and sends him back to Arkham. In Batman Gotham Adventures, Harvey sets up a mock game show and lures his father into becoming a contestant, hoping to get his revenge on the man who had caused him so much pain in his youth. Harvey made it seem as if Lester were going to win a large cash prize, and even with his murderous son right in front of him, Lester showed absolutely no remorse and was entirely focused on the money. When Two-Face flipped his coin here, he was either going to kill his father or destroy the money, and when he managed to do the latter, Lester scrambled after the burning money in a frenzy, managing to save 10,000 of it, which he claimed he could triple if he could just get to Atlantic City, completely dismissing and ignoring his son in the process. One of the only instances of Big Bad Harv helping Batman without Harvey's influence occurs in Gotham Adventures issue 47, where Batman approaches Two-Face for advice on public defenders, which he reluctantly gives him after losing a coin toss. We don't know the details of this one, but in Batman Adventures issue 9, Batman claimed that at one point, Two-Face offered him a choice between 2 doors, both of which led to a painful death. After Dick Grayson decides to go on a journey of his own, we see in the Batman Adventures The Lost Years issue 3 that Two-Face has made connections in a country called Santa de la Rosa and is attempting to send plane loads of drugs back to Gotham. But Dick manages to destroy a shipment and send Harvey back to Gotham empty-handed. Before the second Robin, Tim Drake, began his career as Batman's new sidekick, he was forced to fend for himself at a young age due to his father leaving the city after he stole from Two-Face, who he was working for at the time. When Two-Face's thugs came looking for Shifty Drake, Tim ran into Harvey trying to escape them, and it's in this story that Two-Face showed us just how merciless he can be. After Tim is unable to get them any information about his father's whereabouts, Two-Face flips for his fate, with the good heads meaning he'd be released, and bad heads meaning he'd be killed, and it landed on bad heads. Not only does this show us that Two-Face is more than willing to have children killed, but his larger plot in this story, the release of 2 gas canisters onto the streets of Gotham, unless he's delivered $22 million by 10:22 p.m., that's 22:22 in military time, shows us that Two-Face isn't just willing to kill children, but to engage in the mass murder of all manner of innocents, because in all likelihood, the release of this gas would have killed thousands, if not millions of people. But as usual, he's stopped before he can do any serious damage. Another instance of Harvey nearly murdering a child occurs in Batman Gotham Adventures issue 44, where he forces Nightwing to choose between saving his own life or the life of an infant. And in this same story, Harvey sets up a series of games that forces Batman to choose between saving one person or another. But in typical Batman fashion, he manages to save all of them. But this sequence had the added effect of creating a rift between Batman and his allies, as Batman chose to chase after Harvey rather than stay behind to make sure Nightwing was alright. A choice he needed to make, but one that he's not sure he'll ever be able to forgive himself for. Now, all of the crimes that Harvey commits as Two-Face can be attributed to Big Bad Harv's influence, but one thing we haven't discussed in detail yet is something I mentioned earlier, the fact that Harvey is still alive and well within Two-Face, and how the struggle between the two is present in many of the crimes they commit. For though Harvey formed this alternate personality due to the factors we've already discussed, he never wanted to be the arch-criminal that is Two-Face. And in fact, that is the very nature of Two-Face, a man who embodies both good and evil, who's been corrupted to the point that his evil side prevails more often than his good side does. But in the Batman Adventures Volume 1 Issue 22, Batman says that Two-Face's use of the coin and his inability to commit any crimes without its blessing is proof that Harvey is still alive within them. As if he were truly just an evil man who'd gone past the point of no return, he should be able to commit as many crimes as he'd like, without limitation. And indeed, Harvey is constantly trying to either regain total control of his body or foil Big Bad Harv. One of the holdovers that's present within both Harvey and Big Bad Harv's personality is their continued love for Grace. And during his first string of crimes, Harvey was almost brought back from the brink by Grace, but the arrival of Rupert Thorne and the revelation that she helped him locate Harvey ruined that. Despite this, at some point after this happens, Harvey is making strides with therapy at Arkham with the help of Bruce and Grace, even feeling as if he's gaining more and more control of himself every day, which the doctors say will soon allow him to undergo a plastic surgery operation to fix his face. But as is typical for the misfortunate life of Harvey Dent, something quite sinister ruins all the progress he made: the Joker. After Harvey completes one of his sessions, and he's being escorted back to his cell, the Joker plants the idea in Harvey's mind that Grace and Bruce are having an affair. And while he dismisses it initially, the Joker makes sure that Harvey believes this lie by having Harley photograph Grace kissing Bruce on the cheek, and then having the photo published in the paper under the headline, "Billionaire, Lawyer, to Marry." This causes Harvey to go berserk, break out of Arkham, kidnap Bruce, Grace, and Dick Grayson, and then blow them all up at Bruce's Gotham Gardens project. When Two-Face is inevitably cornered, he threatens to throw Grace overboard on a boat they're all on, so either Batman or Robin is forced to jump in after her, and he can shoot the other, telling Grace to forgive him, but that he did it for them. Grace manages to wound Harvey with his coin though, and Batman once again subdues him. But we do learn something else quite interesting here, that due to his love for Grace, Harvey deludes himself into believing that he truly did everything he did here for her. And with his love for her being one of the only constants between his two personas, he's mortified when Grace calls him a monster, because that would mean that she, one of the only good things left in his life, had finally abandoned her, which is a harrowing thought for both Harvey and Big Bad Harv. A year after this, Harvey is sprung from jail by a gangster named Little Johnny Infantino, hoping that he can help him send a rival of his, Weird Tony Hendra, to prison by providing him with damning information about him that he acquired when he was DA. Harvey dropped his coin and was forced to leave it behind when they took him though, something that he couldn't stand, and with that little slight influencing him, Harvey refuses, even after Johnny provides him a new coin to use. but Johnny had threatened to kill Grace beforehand. So in a mad dash to save her, Harvey sprints to a payphone and uses his new coin to call her and warn her. And afterwards, he breaks the payphone to get his coin back. Another example of just how important a coin is to the stability of Two-Face's psyche. Because he's stuck with a lousy coin, he ends up helping Batman and Robin eliminate Johnny's thugs. And he even takes a bullet for Batman, another sign that Harvey is always lurking beneath the surface and waiting to do any good that he can. Another example of Harvey's helpfulness occurs in Batman Adventures Volume 2, Issue 1, when Ra's al Ghul plots to have many of Arkham's inmates murdered. Harvey shows himself to be a model prisoner when he helps one of the orderlies named Jerry escort the ventriloquist back to his cell. But once the assassins arrive, he also helps Batman fight them off, making the excuse that he's only doing so because his coin got lost in some rubble. And funnily enough, when he gets it back, he flips a coin when one of the assassins comes at him to decide whether or not he's allowed to kill him. One of Harvey's more curious bouts of good deeds occurs in Batman Gotham Adventures Volume 12. Sometime after the assassins came to Arkham, Harvey has finally made enough progress again with his therapy to earn the right to have his face fixed. But before he can have the operation, he's kidnapped by what appears to be a group of Rupert Thorne's thugs. But it wasn't Thorne's men, it was his own men who kidnapped him, as Big Bad Harv knew that if Harvey had the surgery, he'd be eliminated. Batman manages to recover Harvey after his coin continually lands on its edge, confusing him and sending him into a panic as it rolls off the building they're on, nearly causing Harvey to jump off after it. While this showed us just how tragically ingrained Big Bad Harv was in Harvey's personality, one of the more heart-wrenching things that happens to Harvey has to be his manifestation of a third personality, the Judge. As I've said a few times, the good side of Harvey was always warring with Big Bad Harv, and after suffering for who knows how long with this parasite plaguing his mind, Harvey's good side did the unthinkable. It created a third, purely good persona known as the Judge, a man who would act as a vigilante much like Batman, with the help of a man named Councilman Corcoran. The Judge carved a path through Gotham's underworld, subduing many of the arch-villains who weren't incarcerated. But his final act was to be the capture and execution of Two-Face, whom the Judge had deemed guilty. So in a bizarre twist of fate, Harvey was hunting Harvey, and with a mind so overloaded with all the misery he'd been through, he sentenced himself to death. He fails, of course, and after being sent back to Arkham, Harvey's mind has been so heavily damaged by this escapade that all he can do is sit in his cell and repeat the word guilty over and over again. But after some time has passed, he once again makes progress in his therapy, as we see in Gotham Adventures Volume 12. However, Harvey's therapist in Arkham had tried a new method this time around, switching his coin with one that was weighted on the good side, forcing it to always land good heads up. After Harvey once again broke out of Arkham, he started using his coin to decide what to do as usual. But every time it landed good heads up, he was forced to commit a good deed rather than a bad one. And the good he ended up doing here were the exact opposite deeds of crimes that he had committed in the past, with the intended goal of reversing all the harm he'd done. He saves a woman from thugs at Gotham International, robs a bank without stealing anything, donates the jewels he takes from a jewelry heist he orchestrated, turns the thief who he used to steal the jewels into the police, and sets up his former henchmen Min and Max, so they too are captured. His therapist was worried that his actions here would cause him to regress back into the Judge, but instead, something worse happens. Two-Face knew after a few tosses that the coin was rigged, but in the wake of his attempt to end himself via the Judge, those feelings still lingered, and so Harvey continued to use the coin in an effort to atone for his sins before he once again tried to end his life, as he had already judged himself guilty, and he no longer had any hope that he would ever be anything more than a monster. Batman saves him, of course, and while this was one of the more tragic moments in Harvey's life, there was another to come that served as the most heartbreaking thing that Harvey ever endured after becoming Two-Face. In Batman Black and White Volume 11, Harvey has finally made it to the point where he's able to undergo the surgery to fix his face. The surgery is led by one Dr. Marilyn Crane, and the surgery is a success, granting Harvey a new lease on life. Because of how badly their last meeting went, Grace seems to have finally washed her hands of Harvey. But Harvey persevered, and though he had a hard time adjusting, he eventually landed a job with a small law firm and entered into a relationship with Dr. Crane. But Dr. Crane had a secret, a more or less evil twin who was the exact opposite of her virtuous self, and worried that her presence might cause Harvey to regress back into Two-Face, she kept her from him. But Madeline, ever jealous of her happy and successful sister, seduced Harvey and began an affair with him. This did have an adverse effect on his psyche, and he was slowly becoming the dual-minded man he had once been. And recognizing this, he chose to end his affair with Madeline. But Madeline was unable to accept this, and so she murdered her sister so Harvey and her could be together. And Harvey discovered her corpse upon returning home the night of her murder. Broken once again, Harvey rescarred his face and went to confront Madeline, asking her whether or not she wanted to be with him now, which she did. However, Harvey didn't scar himself just to scare Madeline. He did it because he knew that Harvey was no killer, but Big Bad Harv certainly was. So after kissing Madeline one last time, he promptly killed her before being escorted back to Arkham. Despite this, eventually, Harvey again would make progress in curbing his illness, and we can see this during the events of the Justice League vs. the Fatal Five, where Two-Face serves as a buddy and protector for Thomas before he leaves Arkham. And in Batman Beyond 2.0 Volume 1 Issue 16, we learn from the elderly Bruce that Harvey was eventually rehabilitated, and he ended up passing Dent's Law, which stipulated that supervillains who were convicted or killed in battle were given no burial rights to ensure that no public martyrdom could occur. A happy and impactful ending for a man who had endured so much pain. But you might be asking yourself, what would Harvey's life have been like if he hadn't become Two-Face? Well, we don't know what it would have been like had Bruce Wayne been in his life when he did. But when The Stranger shows Bruce an alternate reality where he never became Batman in Gotham Adventures issue 33, we learn that Harvey without Bruce, and without his scars, eventually becomes a crooked lawyer who's in bed with Boss Zuko. And it was because of an unrestrained Big Bad Harv that Harvey got involved with criminals. Another small instance of an alternate universe Harvey appearing is in the Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles adventure comic, where Harvey escapes from Arkham due to a strange portal appearing in his cell. And after Batman heads to his apartment that's decorated in his dual style, he finds Harvey watching an episode of My Little Pony, and he leaves shortly after he helps him understand how he managed to get out of Arkham. So these are all the events and circumstances that make up the story of this iteration of Harvey Dent. And with everything we've learned in mind, what is there to say about the animated Two-Face? Like all versions of this character, Harvey suffered some heavy bouts of tragedy and trauma that scarred him in many different ways. After bottling up his anger and manifesting a second personality, Harvey would eventually become the dreaded Two-Face, arch-criminal and crime boss that harassed the citizens of Gotham with his two-tone machinations. Despite his transformation and all the crimes he committed, to be Two-Face is to be a man at war with not just himself, but good and evil. A broken mind caught between two paradigms that lives in a constant state of torment, as all the horror he's experienced over the course of his life stares right back at him in the mirror every single day. Throughout the many stories that this version of Two-Face appeared in, we get to watch as Harvey continually struggles to regain himself and fail to do so time and time again. And to see this character in action is to view a human being suffering a level of anguish that few of us can imagine. But in Gotham Adventures Volume 12, Harvey says that his life has been one long string of bad luck. And while that might seem to be the case, and while Harvey did suffer through some unfortunate circumstances, much of which were out of his control, there was never a guarantee that his life would continue to be miserable. And one of the saddest things about Harvey is due to all the trauma he had suffered, the darkness clouding his eyes had become so thick that he could no longer see any light. And while we all might feel like Harvey sometimes, that we're just unlucky and life has dealt us a bad hand, there's always a chance that you'll draw a new one and life will become more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. And fortunately for Harvey, it seems as if he eventually realized that. One thing that we should note about Harvey's crimes is that most of them were committed with the goal of destroying the lives of other people who had hurt him. So with that in mind, it's reasonable to assume that while Harvey was a criminal because he committed many crimes, he's more so a scorned man who's constantly on the lookout for revenge. Revenge against Batman, revenge against Rupert Thorne, revenge against anyone who hurt him. And in all likelihood, if Two-Face had gotten his revenge, I'm sure he would have ended up passing the same sentence on himself that the judge did. Though he became a monster, there was never a time where there was no hope for Harvey Dent, as the good he had left in him kept hanging on, by a thread if necessary, until the day finally came when he could conquer all that he'd been forced to experience in his life. And as one of the greatest renditions of this character ever created, Harvey Dent, Two-Face, the Judge, will always remain a delight to watch in action. For as sad as his story is, he conducted his business with a style and ferocity that few of his caliber can match. And while Harvey would eventually return to the light and regain his true self, I know that I, and likely you my dear viewer, will always remember him for his multicolored and brutal evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Two-Face? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.